Any mention for unlisted matter? Any mention for unlisted matter? From the main list, item number 1.
Please, Your Lordship. Your Lordship, the reading are almost complete, Your Lordship. So can you give me 2 weeks time to file agenda?
You're for the?
I'm for the petitioner, Your Lordship.
Rejoinder?
Yes.
Very well. Since the petitioner seeks some further time to file the rejoinder, come on, let the matter appear a fortnight hence.
Not sure.
Paragraph, the rejoinder should be filed within a week from date.
Much obliged.
Much obliged. Item number 2.
May it please your Lordships. Lordships, this is the matter where the power of the state government to amend the rules of conduct and discipline for teachers in grant-in-aid colleges is an issue. Lordship, in this, the previous position, as it were, was Rules 6 and 7 of these employee conduct rules stipulated a restriction on the right of the teachers to participate in electoral activities.
No. Previous rule did not restrict. Previous rule imposed a condition.
Lordship.
Now you are prohibiting.
Completely prohibiting.
So that is not permissible.
Lordship, now I'll just make out my case if Lordship permits me. Lordship, in this case, now deficit grant-in-aid colleges receive grant-in-aid from the government, and that is pursuant to the obligation of the state to ameliorate the education standards at the state. Now, since this is a largesse that is granted to the deficit colleges, there are requirements that there must be certain conditions, certain conditionalities that are attached to the
There's
use.
no nexus with.
Lordship, I'll attempt to establish
nexus
that.
with the funds.
Lordship, in fact, there would be a nexus with the funds, and I will make that good. For the simple reason, Lordship, that if the grant-in-aid is given to a college and there are certain conditions attached to that, the test has to be whether those conditions, in my respectful submission, whether those conditions are in fact reasonable, or in other words, not so arbitrary or completely unreasonable that the funds are being put to use subject to those conditions. Now, in my respectful submission, if Lordship will see the scheme of the education policy,
There is no nexus, sir.
Lordship, I'll
For
establish.
instance, if you let's say impose a condition
Yes.
that to be eligible to obtain the grant, all teachers must wear bandanas.
Yes.
Has no nexus.
That would be palpably perverse.
Over here also,
Lordship.
who are you favoring? You're favoring the citizens.
Yes.
The citizen or the young citizen who's coming to obtain education.
Yeah.
Why should that young citizen suffer aid being stopped for the purpose of his education because one of the several teachers in the school wants to participate in an election?
Lordship, I would put it slightly differently, if I may. In fact, it is for the interest of the education standards of the student that these regulations necessarily need to be in place. For instance, Lordship, these rules also contain a separate stipulation where private employment by these teachers is prohibited except to the tune of tuitions to the extent of 1 hour. That is permissible under the rules. Now, this stipulation also, one may argue, would be completely palpably perverse, or it may be arbitrary.
No.
But if...
No.
Lordship.
It is not perverse because it ensures that the time is given. You can stipulate that teachers must give 8 hours, 20 hours, 40 hours a week in taking classes. You can do that. That will have direct nexus with the purpose of the aid. But you cannot say that you cannot do this or you cannot do that, particularly when it is a right to stand for election.
Lordship, I'll attempt to place my pointers slightly differently. Lordship, as it stood, Lordship has seen Rule 6 and Rule 7. As it stood, it had certain conditionalities put in place. So for instance, if I were to get selected as the body of, in a political organization, I was elected as an official, in official capacity.
Office bearer.
Office bearer. Or if I was elected as a member of the Legislative Assembly, then I would necessarily have to apply for compulsory leave, which would then be granted based on certain considerations. And that compulsory leave being granted, I would be free to carry out my activities as a elected representative. Now in that situation, Lordship would see, for instance, a teacher is to be elected to the office of a member of the Legislative Assembly. Now for 5 years, during the course of his term, under the erstwhile rules, he would necessarily have to be put on compulsory leave, which would mean that one teacher, which is part of the deficit college's system, will then necessarily have to be substituted for that period.
But for that compulsory leave, he is not getting pay.
Lordship, that may be.
He is not getting pay. And therefore, the fund is there to engage a substitute for him.
But the availability of the substitutes
That's
may
neither
not
here nor there.
Yes.
That's neither here nor there. Today, you're restricting the person.
Lordship.
He's not complaining that when I do something else, you have to pay me. He's happy. When I do something else, I go there, my lien remains or whatever my links remain, and I can come back after completing the leave over here.
Lordship.
He doesn't get paid for that.
Lordship. I quite see that, Lordship, but now the endeavor here is to persuade your lords
This
to...
endeavor is completely
Lordship will
draconian.
Lordship will permit me to at least make that effort. For the simple reason, Lordship, that in my respectful understanding, even on the merits of the activity which is sought to be prohibited, which here is participating in elections, participating in political activities by becoming an office bearer.
And how do you say by becoming an office bearer? Otherwise, there is no distinction. I can go and address rallies every day without becoming a member, and there is no you don't suffer for it.
No, and that Lordship would in fact inure to the reasonability of the restriction, in my respectful understanding, for the reason that once you are an office bearer, it is understood in the present scenario how politicking works, how political activities consume the amount of time that they do, that this would be in direct conflict in my respectful understanding to the nature of the duties that the teacher will have.
It will never get past us.
Lordship, if Lordship will permit me, I'll because there are some
This is as bad as choosing the color of the undergarments for teachers to wear.
Lordship,
This is ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. An Indian citizen has a right.
yes.
Here is an educated Indian citizen who is qualified to teach.
Yes.
Who better than him to participate in the awareness that goes about in politics? Who better than him to offer his candidature? What are you perpetuating? You are perpetuating those rustic goons who don't pass class 1 or class 2 but use their muscle power.
Indeed not, Your Lordship, because
That is the exact result.
Lordship.
You are stopping middle class educated people from entering politics.
Lordship, if I may, for a moment, because the impression perhaps that is coming across is that this is a restriction on the teacher from going into electoral activities.
This is not a restriction on the teacher. This is a suffering which is occasioned to the student because of the conduct of a teacher against which you cannot have any grievance.
Now, if I may, Lordship, because there is something to say on the nature of the activity. For instance, I may just give a couple of illustrations, because when I was preparing for the matter, I was actually trying to understand what could possibly be the reasonable explanation for this. So, for instance, Lordship, this, in my respectful understanding, could also lead to a situation where there is a conflict of interest.
When that arises, we'll look at that.
But so therefore, if Lordship, there is some justification.
When that arises, we'll look at that. There cannot be any conflict of interest.
Lordship, in fact,
Look at how your politicians were. They came from an elitist class. You obtained independence because of an elitist class of politicians. There had to be churning. Other sections of the society had to get in. But all the people previously were educated.
Yes.
I don't know if you've read the Constituent Assembly debates.
Lordship.
One of you have. Well, I haven't. So you can educate me on that, because it's impossible to read the entirety of the Constituent Assembly debates, but still you can educate me. One of the discussions over there was that all persons becoming a legislator or a parliamentarian required basic education and basic educational qualifications. There was a great debate over it. At the end of it, it was dropped because it was found to be restrictive. Yet, the view expressed in the Constituent Assembly was, in due course, we hope that these educational qualifications will be put in place. And I'm only talking about Assembly and Parliament. Because what is the business of those people who go over there? Their business is to enact laws. And today you are releasing unpad people who do not know A from Ka, who go and legislate. There is an expression used in law, the wisdom of the legislature. Where is that wisdom? You are perpetuating fraud by doing something like this. You are stopping the educated from exercising their right as a citizen. Absolutely horrendous.
Few of the points that have fallen from my lords, if I may, if I have correctly understood them. Lordship, a lot of it has to do with under legislation or lack of a legislation under 324 and putting in place a stricter mechanism or in fact even a semblance of a legislation. But today, Lordship, we are not...
Today what we have is almost a mockery in the name of democracy. A packet of biryani, a bottle of beer is enough.
Lordship, I need
to address that situation to ensure how the aware, the educated.
Yes.
And by educated, I don't mean merely having a few letters next to your name. There are several.
But perhaps
who go around all the fraud universities all over the country. They go and get a few letters, obtain a few letters over correspondence or over. I don't mean letters, but people who are educated. Is there any debate that goes on today?
No. Lordship, if I may, because the only reason I'm persisting with my arguments, and I subscribe to entirely whatever has fallen from my laws, there can be no quarrel with that proposition. That there needs to be a higher degree of...
no quarrel with that proposition, get rid of this rubbish.
No, Lordship, because for the reason, Lordship, that what I will endeavor to do, and I'll do it in the shortest possible time, because I've seen what the writing on the wall is quite clear to me, so I need not persist beyond a point. But there are a few points that need to perhaps be looked at slightly differently in my respectful understanding. And it is perhaps with that innocent hope that I'm trying to persuade my lords that my lordship...
Your first principal proposition is that as the provider of the money and as the state government no less, you are entitled to impose certain conditions.
Yes.
However, since we function under the overarching principle of Article 14 in this country, the restrictions that you impose have necessarily to be reasonable.
Yes.
What are reasonable restrictions? Restrictions which have a nexus with the purpose. What is the purpose of the grant? To promote education. And as long as you say they don't get paid if they get elected, fine. But when you're imposing a restriction on a person and taking away his right, that's undue interference.
Now, if taking a cue from what has fallen from my lords, lordships, if we were to view this as they in fact are conditions of service. Now, for instance, in a government establishment, purely government, here we are talking about a grant-in-aid institution, but where it is a government
you proceed on the basis of office of profit, we are pretty happy to entertain you.
No, Lordship, that issue in fact doesn't fall here for consideration. But
That's the only restriction, office of profit.
Precisely. But the stipulation by an employer of a condition of service, for instance, if these are purely private and the government was not in fact giving any grants. Now, within the terms of employment,
Don't even refer to that, because the private employer has the right. He can say, today is Monday, I'm throwing you out, tomorrow is Tuesday, I'm recruiting you. So it does not apply to the private.
Now the question therefore then arises is that in such a situation where the grant is being given by the government, if the employing college as a matter of principle feels that it is necessary for them to permit this sort of an activity.
The employing college is not doing that. You are forcing the employing college to do it.
Lordship, I am in fact not, this is a choice that the college itself, and that is why it brings us back to the point.
All right. I give you a choice.
Yes.
That, in an oxygen-free atmosphere, I provide you the oxygen.
It's an option.
The condition that I add is provided you don't breathe.
It's as Lordship is putting it, it would be an option choice in that sense. But here, Lordship, stipulation of a condition of service would also be an aspect of the matter where Lordship would perhaps have...
This is rubbish.
Another 2 points if just...
Who better than a teacher?
And there is no quarrel with that proposition because because today, Lordship, we are only on the issue of, number one, whether as a government giving grant in aid, such a condition could at all be, a condition could be stipulated, number one. Number two, whether...
Talking about reforms,
this is completely regressive. Completely regressive.
Lordship, I may just, if Lordship will permit me for my satisfaction, just to...
We'll permit you, we have to hear you.
Just...
At the end of the day, you'll be paying for it.
Lordship, in this matter, because I believe that there are two views that are possible, and a bona fide decision was taken.
Second view which is possible.
Because Lordship...
There's no second view which is possible here. Just think of it, You're a young citizen, just think of it. What are we doing?
Lordship,
What are we doing?
I attempted to view it as a student perhaps in an institution. That was my endeavor to understand whether or not, because on first principles, if I am able to understand and digest such a stipulation, perhaps only then will I be able to persuade my lords. But for instance, I see it in practice as a student. When a student is aware, say for instance, as to a teacher's predisposition or a teacher's...
All good movements have emanated from students' bodies. Students' bodies influenced by their teachers. All good movements, whether it is, resisting price increase, whether it is some kind of measure against the environment, whether it is some other public cause, there are several which have arisen from students' movements. Because at that age, the formative years, I'm talking about when you're in college, undergraduate, postgraduate, you think you can change the world. And you see so much of inequality around you, you see so much of social injustice that, at that age you think that you can make a difference. And a lot of it is because of the education that is imparted, because of the thoughts that are planted for you to think about.
And I do agree with that, Lordship. But here, that is precisely why. Political activity as it stands today.
You have not made any point yet.
Lordship, all right. Only one last...
Not last. Gather yourself,
yes,
and make an argument.
All right.
You have nothing. Gather yourself, make an argument. That argument has to be founded on constitutional principles.
Lordship. And Lordship, I'll make that...
You don't know that, hopefully you are aware of the development in the constitutional law.
To some extent. Yes, Your Lordship. I'll make my efforts to find.
You must know all of them.
Yes.
You know, from you must know the history, from how we changed our view from Golaknath to Sancheti, down right up to Maneka Gandhi. And Maneka Gandhi wasn't that far back. Maneka Gandhi was 25 years after independence. Before Maneka Gandhi, they were looked as different packages. And it ultimately coalesced in Maneka Gandhi when it became the entire basket. So you can't look at one in isolation. You have to look at the fundamental rights as part of a basket, where there is a whole lot of interplay between one right and the other.
Lordship, then if Lordship will permit me, I'll
Yes,
make another.
formulate something.
I'll make
formulate
another.
something. Formulate your points. Think about it.
Yes.
Jot them down.
Yes.
And then try and find illustrations. It's a difficult case for you to sustain.
Yes.
But then you've got to, think about it. Spend time thinking. This is not a matter where reading will get you anywhere.
Yes.
You have to think.
Any appropriate date that
You
Lordship
take whatever
considers?
time, but this will
Any date next week, Lordship, I'll make my efforts.
take your pick.
Lordship, next Friday, if it's
Fridays are not good days.
Friday.
Fridays are not good days for
Thursdays then.
Thursday. Yes. 11th is the no. Next one is not 11th. Next must be 5th or 6th. 4th. Yes. At the request of the state, let the matter appear next week. Then give it the date of 11th.
I'm so grateful.
Of 4th. Sorry.
You're blessed.
I'm okay.
And this is a matter of importance to your client. Let the state lose at the hand of a heavier weight than you. You don't take the responsibility.
Lordship, I'll
Make the argument, but let the state lose at the hands of a heavier weight. You shouldn't be left blamed for something that is indefensible.
see that.
Yes.
Item number 3.
Yes, madam. What is this?
Lordship, in this matter, we took steps through the department, Lordship.
Sorry?
Lordship, in this matter, we took steps through the department upon the respondent, and as per the instruction that we received from the department, Lordship, the respondent has acknowledged the receipt of the said notice.
The respondent?
Has acknowledged the receipt. Lordship, we have handed over the acknowledgement.
Where is the affidavit of service?
Lordship, if we may be granted one.
You have to file an affidavit of service. Since service does not appear to be complete, let the matter appear a fortnight hence. Paragraph, the applicants will inform the respondent of the adjourned date and file an affidavit of service. Then give a date.
Obliged, Lordship.